So, welcome to Chalke Valley History Festival, and thank you for the brilliant talk you just gave on your book. It's an absolutely fascinating and very relevant field of history that I think needs to be talked about more. So far, what are you enjoying most about the festival?
Everyone, listen, when people found out I was speaking here, everybody said to me, it's the most fun thing ever, and it is really, really fun. I got to have a look around yesterday, and just the setting is so beautiful, and there's so many interesting things, and I can see why people come for the whole week. I mean, I'm a bit sad that I have to leave after this.
For what reason do you believe has the stigmatisation of women in combat been much harder to break down than other sexist social constructs?
That's a really interesting question, and I think it's because the military is such a central core social actor, and that a lot of feminists say that the military and patriarchy go hand in hand, and I think that can be overstated sometimes, but I think that the reason to keep women out of the military very much has to do with sustaining the masculinity of the military, and I do think there are probably links about sustaining gender roles in society as a whole. So I think that's why it's been so hard. I think it's sort of the most traditionally masculinized, feminized divide we see in the military.
Yeah, absolutely. In your book, which is also absolutely amazing, was it released last week?
Yes, last week.
That's amazing.
Yep.
You wrote, despite what the feminist movement told women and told the world, they were not equal. How relevant do you think that is in today's society?
Oh, I think it's really relevant, and I think that's one of the reasons why. So it's no surprise that the states that we see that have women in combat are Western democracies, and the states that don't are not. And it's because it is a very profound way to both remind women of their gender equality. So if you keep women out of combat, that's what that quote is about, is you're saying to them, look, you can't do this. There's something wrong with you that prevents you from taking on this role. And until you change that, I think it is actually very hard to change ideas about gender equality in society in general.
And then during your talk, you mentioned that men claim to be too distracted by women in combat to perform effectively.
Yes.
So similar states are made during current times, whether that's in mixed sports or even the mixed education setting. How do you think we can tackle women being sexualized by men in this way and using it as an excuse for them not to do a particular job?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I would say two things. One is that there is actually not much evidence that this is the case, right? So typically, also, the more serious the combat situation is, frankly, the less anybody cares. And that's why I said in the talk, somebody asked me this question, and I said, look, the Red Army, people were not worried about it. Why? They were worried about surviving and winning a war. And the gender stuff was irrelevant. And you talk to people who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan, they will often say the same thing. Like, we see the uniform, we don't see the person, doesn't matter. That's not to say that sexual harassment isn't a problem in the military. There is some evidence that it's a problem in peacetime militaries when they're not deployed. And again, probably relates to this very strong historical ultra-masculine style, and cultural change is slow. And, it will happen. We've seen it happen in firefighting, which used to be a hugely all-male profession. Integrate women, lots of sexual harassment at the beginning, and the situation gradually improves. So I think that leadership seems to be where we have studies of this. Leadership is absolutely key. So the more the leadership from the top down to the middle ranks is very much on board, the less likely this stuff is to happen.
So the levels of sexual harassment haven't been altered by how many females?
No.
Oh, okay.
Depressingly.
Yeah.
So we know that in the Canadian military, for example, which has admitted women into combat roles since 1985, that sexual harassment is still a really big problem. It doesn't seem to be linked to the question of whether or not women are allowed in combat, though. It just seems to be the presence of women in the military, full stop. And cultural change is slow. And the problem with the Canadian military has been, there's been a couple of inquiries about it, has been a lack of leadership.
And then another thing mentioned in your talk was the specific warrior grave that was assumed to be male for years and years before it was actually DNA tested to see what gender it was. Do you think we need to reassess the gender of more prominent historical figures who have already automatically been assumed as male?
Not necessarily the more prominent ones, although I mentioned the father of American cavalry warfare, turns out maybe was intersex, maybe was a woman. I think that there are probably more surprises that are lurking out there. I don't know whether or not we need a systematic review, but I think we do need to open our minds to the fact that there were probably a lot more women than we even thought of, because their disguises were really good, right? And they only got found out when they got wounded, and so we know that a few of them were never found out and they just went back to their regular lives after the war.
Very well. Thank you for that. That is all the questions I've got for you today. So
great, thank you so much. That was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you.